Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to our open forum on freedom of speech, Donald Trump and campus repression, the case of Badar Khan Suri. My name is Nader Hashemi. I'm the director of the Al Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. I also teach Middle East politics at the School of Foreign Service. Before beginning, two quick announcements. One of our speakers, Asla Bali, president of the Middle East Studies Association, professor at law, could not be with us today because of a death in the family. So we have Sarah Leah Whitson joining us instead. I'll introduce Sarah in a moment. And the second introductory announcement is that we have a freedom of speech policy here at Georgetown that we're obligated to read out in public so that everyone is on the same playing field and nobody gets in trouble. So I'm going to ask Jonathan, my hardworking assistant, to read out the Georgetown University freedom of speech policy.
And one moment, please. Dr. Hashmi, you could start the introduction and I'll do that in a moment.
Okay, sure. Let's start with introductions. So the purpose of this event is threefold. Number one, to express our solidarity with our detained colleague, Badar Khan Suri. Allow me to do this at the outset by quoting from a Georgetown University alumni letter that appeared in today's Guardian, and that was signed by almost 400 Georgetown University alumni. It reads in part, Badar Khan Suri's persecution represents a fundamental violation of academic freedom, due process, and the Jesuit values that define Georgetown University. The letter goes on to state, we see this detention clearly for what it is, an attempt to instill fear, silence critical thought, and erode solidarity among students and scholars of varying backgrounds and identities. We reject this attempt and demand his immediate release. The second goal of today's event is to examine the larger political, legal, and moral principles at stake at this dark moment in American politics and American history, and that flow from the arrest of Badar Khan Suri, the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil, the arrest of Rumeysa, Ozturk, and others. We want to focus on the themes that matter for a university audience, such as freedom of speech, academic freedom, campus repression, in the context of what is now clearly a transition to authoritarianism that is taking place in the United States today. And third, we also want to keep the spotlight on Gaza, where Israel, backed by the United States, is in the final phase of a genocidal campaign that seeks to ethnically cleanse the 2 million people who live on that blood-soaked piece of land. Many of the international students, as you know, who were arrested were detained precisely because they had the moral courage to express solidarity with Palestinian human and national rights and to oppose a US-backed genocide. I'm hoping we can also talk about how this topic pertains to what's happening in Gaza today. I have a few more updates to begin, but Jonathan has our freedom of expression policy ready, and he's going to read it out for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speakers and the organizing department to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption to the event. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question. In the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. Thank you.
A few updates that are pertinent to this topic that I'd like to share with you. Number one, according to the Inside Higher Education website, which tracks the revocation of visas, as of 11 o'clock this morning, there were over 1,000 visa revocations that have taken place in 170 colleges and universities in this country. I just heard a few hours ago, before this event started, that a Palestinian-born green holder and student at Columbia University was arrested by federal agents in the middle of his appointment to become a U.S. citizen in Vermont. His name is Mohsen Mahdawi. He grew up in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. He was about to become a U.S. citizen within a few hours, and they arrested him. As you all know, the second announcement on Friday, an immigration judge in Louisiana ruled that based on his beliefs, Mahmoud Khalil is deportable because he allegedly poses a grave risk to the national security and U.S. foreign policy of this country. What comes next in his trial? Where do things stand? We want to talk about that this afternoon as well. And finally, Trump's policy of extortion against American universities and colleges continues unabated. First, it was Columbia, then it was Harvard, then it was University of Pennsylvania, more recently Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Northwestern. The good news is that from Princeton, we're hearing a lot of encouraging words that they want to resist this authoritarian takeover. I hope Georgetown will follow in that path and that other universities will do so as well. Writing in today's New York Times, Masha Gessen accurately observes that it is crystal clear that anti-Semitism and DEI are mere pretexts for the attack on universities today in this country. Like much of what this administration does, the war on higher education is driven by anti-intellectualism and greed. Trump is building a mafia state in which the Don distributes both money and power, she writes. Universities are independent centers of intellectual and, to some extent, political power. And it is trying to destroy that independence that is at the heart of this attack on American universities today. So I think all things considered, looking at this picture that I've just painted, I think it's accurate to state that the spirit of Senator Joe McCarthy is very alive and well in the Trump administration today, which this administration has spent months dishonestly mischaracterizing legitimate criticism of Israel's government's war crimes in Gaza as anti-Semitic, pursuing witch hunts against American colleges, and threatening free speech, and specifically those international students and green card holders, many of them who came to this country to exercise their right to freedom of speech. And one final update I want to share with you, and perhaps it's the most important update. Yesterday, I was in South Texas, where I met with Badar Khan Suri at an ICE detention facility. I told him we would be gathering here today in solidarity with him. He asked me to convey to you his deep gratitude to all of his supporters who have spoken out in his defense. I hope news of the Georgetown University alumni letter that appeared in The Guardian today will reach him in his jail cell. He has been through hell, and I'll leave the rest of the details to a forthcoming essay that I'm about to publish, but I was struck by his attitude and his mood. He was defiant. He quoted Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela several times in our conversation. He explicitly told me that they are his role models during this dark time in his life. Notwithstanding the trauma that he and his family have been subjected to, his spirits are strong. He is in it for the long haul, and he's prepared to defend himself against the defamatory accusations made by Marco Rubio and right-wing media. One thing he told me stands out. He said that if his ordeal and his suffering can help expose the problem of authoritarianism in the USA today and shine a spotlight on the suffering people of Gaza, it will have been worth it. His fellow inmates call him Mahatma Gandhi. Why? Because he's from India. He studied Gandhi. He quotes Gandhi. He's teaching students, he's teaching his fellow prisoners the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi. And so he has earned the name Gandhi in the prison cell as he talks about Gandhi's relevance to their plight. He specifically said that he's inspired by one particular quote, a famous quote from Gandhi that was used against the struggle of British colonialism. It's a famous quote that goes, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win." And then he asked me when we were leaving to send him 4 books so he could read in the prison. 2 of them are by Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism, and Eichmann in Jerusalem, Report on the Banality of Evil, Franz Kafka's novel, The Trial, and finally, George Orwell's 1984. I'll leave it to you to conclude what this reveals about Badar Khan Suri's politics and his ethics. And now to our panel. It's a huge honor to have a distinguished panel with us today to analyze, interpret, and discuss the broader political and moral principles that flow from Badar Khan Suri's case. Hassan Ahmed is the founder and principal of HMA Law Firm. He has a strong background in criminal defense, focusing on cases related to deportation and asylum. He is part of Badar Khan Suri's legal team, and he filed the writ of habeas corpus after Badar Khan Suri was arrested on March the 17th. David Cole is the Honorable George J. Mitchell Professor in Law and Public Policy at Georgetown Law School. He was the former National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. He writes about, teaches constitutional law freedom of expression, and constitutional criminal procedure. He is one of our leading national experts on this topic. He's a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books and to The Nation. Two of his recent essays are highly recommended. Academic Freedom in Peril, published in the New York Review of Books recently, and The Last Time Pro-Palestine Activists Faced Deportation in the New Yorker about a month ago. And last, but certainly not least, is Sarah Leah Whitson. She's the executive director of DAWN, Democracy in the Arab World Now, an organization that was established by the late Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi. Previously, she served as executive director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa division from 2004 to 2020. She's a graduate of UC Berkeley and Harvard Law School and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. The format that we agreed upon is that each of our panelists would speak for roughly 10 to 12 minutes. And then we'll open it up to question and answers. The vision that we have here is very much as a town hall forum. So I want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers and participations from the audience. I want to begin with Hassan Ahmed, Badar Khan Suri's lawyer. I want him to begin with providing us an update on where his case stands, what comes next, especially after the ruling on Friday against Mahmoud Khalil that he is deportable. Then we'll turn to David and Sarah, who will talk about the broader political, legal, and moral principles at stake in this country as a result of the topic that brings us all here today. So with that as an introduction, please join me in welcoming this panel. And Hassan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As Dr. Hashmi said, my name is Hassan Ahmed. I'm an immigration attorney, and I've been practicing immigration law for 21 years and counting. A lot of it in deportation defense and matters of asylum and federal court litigation in connection with immigration. And that brings us to Dr. Badar Khan Suri, because his case is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's true that it started with a writ of habeas corpus that I filed as quickly as possible as soon as I became aware of his, and it was a team effort. We had a shared doc open, and about 5 or 6 lawyers, myself included, were all drafting different sections of it to try to get it filed as quickly as possible. I didn't get a chance to even speak with Dr. Khan Suri until 2 to 3 days later, about 3 days later, because I didn't know where he was. And at 11 a.m. on the day after his arrest, I entered my appearance in, and so ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, was aware that he was a represented party. And despite our numerous attempts at trying to locate him, we were unsuccessful. And he was moved from his home here in Northern Virginia to Chantilly, Virginia, where the enforcement and removal operations initial processing takes place. From there to Farmville, which is about 2.5, 3 hours south, and from there to Richmond, where he boarded a plane and was sent to the Alexandria staging facility, which gave us all heart palpitations, because that's normally the last place where people go before they're actually deported out of the country. We didn't know what was going on, and we've come to expect a certain degree of lawlessness from this administration. Thankfully, he stayed there for about 72 hours before he wound up where he is today in Prairieland, Texas. On the one hand, he has a removal proceeding, a deportation proceeding pending against him. And the sole charge, and I'm using the word charge, but I do not mean charge in the criminal sense, because immigration is civil in nature. And on the one hand, one might think that that's a good thing, that they're not charging him criminally. But unfortunately, the state of the law is our government metes out criminal punishment, calls it civil, and therefore denies the standard protections, constitutional protections, that are granted to all criminal defendants. They don't need to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt in immigration court. There's no jury in immigration court. There's no presumption of innocence in immigration court. But yet he's locked up, chained, shackled, and treated like a criminal, put in with criminals, even though he has done nothing wrong. And the government has said he has done nothing wrong. And that's what the officers who shackled him and arrested him told him. that he did nothing wrong, that it was because of social media. That's what they said. The only charge on his notice to appear is that somebody high up, in this case, presumably Secretary of State Marco Rubio, has made the determination that his presence and/or activities in the United States could have a potentially serious adverse effect on U.S. foreign policy. If that sounds convoluted, it's because it is. The law has existed for a long time. It's nothing new. What is new is the way that this law is being used to clamp down on free speech. That is new. The last case and the seminal case for Section 237A4C of the Immigration Nationality Act, which is what we call the foreign policy ground, was a case that came out of well, it really took most of the 1990s, and it was the former Deputy Attorney General of Mexico who was wanted in Mexico for an investigation into the assassination of his brother. He perturbed the wrong people, and so Mexico demanded him back, and the US tried 4 times to extradite him and failed because there was no evidence that he had done anything wrong. Eventually, in the late 1990s, they used this foreign policy ground, and the Secretary of State at the time deemed that his presence in the US was bad for foreign policy, and specifically described that this was a time when the United States and Mexico were working. The point is, it was a very different situation. And by the way, the former Attorney General, Juan Ruiz Massieu, was put on house arrest after all this persecution by the US government. Never any proof that he did anything wrong, despite the fact that Mexico wanted him for money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. He took his own life on house arrest by taking a whole bunch of pills in his New Jersey home in 1999. That was the last time, the seminal case, this particular foreign policy ground was used. A case that had criminal undertones to it, a case that was, in between leaders of a huge, 2 countries, where they had tried and failed to extradite him 4 times. That was the last time this was used, and the court, the Board of Immigration Appeals, found that this particular foreign policy ground, if the Secretary of State says that this person's presence is bad, we are nobody as judges to second guess that. So the current state of the law, and this is the point that I want you all to remember, under this foreign policy ground is, the Secretary of State can write up any letter that he wants. He could chat GPT a letter if he wanted to, and no court would have the power to say, wait a second, where did you get that? What is your reasoning? Is this a reasonable determination or not? It's not just reasonable basis for those law students in here. It is no basis. And the Board of Immigration Appeals actually ruled that the only role for the court is ministerial, making sure that the letter exists, making sure the letter is signed, making sure the letter is actually from the Secretary of State, but offering absolutely no insight or scrutiny into why the letter says what it says. Nothing. There was a brilliant dissent written by former board members Lori Rosenberg and in which Paul Wickham Schmidt, both of whom I know very well and respect a great deal, both as jurists and as people, that said, well, the plain text of the statute says that the belief of the Secretary of State has to be reasonable. And if it has to be reasonable, how do you determine what's reasonable if you don't apply some degree of judicial scrutiny to it? We understand the Secretary of State is the expert on matters of foreign policy, and a board member of the Immigration Appeals, Board of Immigration Appeals, or a judge might not have the expertise. But judges make determinations on what's reasonable all the time. It's kind of what judges do, right? But that's the state of the law. And so the current state is the Secretary of State can chat GPT a letter and nobody has any state, and can essentially pick off people to unilaterally deport. And that's what the judge's ruling for Mahmoud Khalil actually meant on Friday. It doesn't mean he will be deported. It means that he can be, because that's the current state of the law. Well, this is my shocked face. I knew that already. We all knew that already. We knew what the state of the law was, and that's exactly what has to change. We're not asking for necessarily the statute, whether it's going to be struck down as unconstitutional or not as a result of this abuse of it. Fine. All we're asking is that a court be empowered to actually say, hey, show your math, and get him the due process that he and anyone else in his position actually deserves. In addition to the removal proceedings, he's got a whole bunch of, we've got a whole bunch of filings in federal court that we filed in relation to the habeas. There's a motion to compel his return. There's a motion for release on bond. We've been trying to get him out. And the current status is all of those motions are going to be heard in the Eastern District of Virginia, federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia on May the 1st. And his first appearance in immigration court remotely will be on May the 6th in Prairieland, Texas. The last thing I wanted to say is why Louisiana and Texas, and where do they send it? Why do they send it to him? Why do they send him down there? Because this is a game that ICE has been playing for a long time. Because they want to break people's spirit. Because they want to send them thousands of miles away from the people that care about them, from their counsel. We've had challenges as his attorneys trying to schedule calls with him, trying to even talk to our own client. The standard response that we get from ICE is, for the detainees' safety, we need to move them to places where there's actually bed space. Lies, lies. There's always bed space in places. What's apparent, what actually exists in Louisiana and Texas is Fifth Circuit case law, which is widely regarded as the most anti-immigrant and the toughest. So even if we get a win in immigration court, an appeal is likely to be slammed down, and we're going to lose. That's why he's in Louisiana and Texas. That's why they build the detention centers in Louisiana and Texas. It's a rigged game. I learned this in 2008 when I had a client in New Jersey, detained in New Jersey, and I had the innocence or naivete to call the detention facility on a Wednesday afternoon to make sure that my client was there. I rented a car, drove up, braved the New Jersey Turnpike, get to the a detention facility about 1 p.m. on Thursday, and find out that he had been moved at 5 a.m. that morning to Louisiana, right? I've been seeing this happen over and over. Sometimes it's bed bugs in Virginia. Sometimes it's lack of space. Sometimes it's a pandemic. Sometimes it's an outbreak of the flu. Whatever, whatever, whatever. It's all lies. It's all lies. So the reason why they moved him there, I call it the Fifth Circuit fast track. That's why they moved him to Louisiana. That's why Mahmoud Khalil wound up in Louisiana. That's why they're moving. That's why Rumeysa Ozturk wound up she's in Louisiana or Texas, one of the two. They all moved down to the Fifth Circuit because the judges there can be relied on to summarily sign off, and that's why we're trying to get him back to a place where, at the very least, he has a modicum of due process, even if the law doesn't want to give it to him.
Thank you, Hassan. We want to come back to you during the Q&A session to see if there's anything that citizens can be doing to try and help Badar Khan Suri at this dark moment. David, you've written eloquently and insightfully on these issues. No one knows this topic better than you do. What do we need to be thinking about at this moment? What are the big themes that matter in terms of this conversation on freedom of speech, Trump, and campus repression against the backdrop of the case of Badar Khan Suri?
First of all, thank you all for being here on just an incredibly beautiful day. I question your judgment that you're here rather than sitting out there on the beautiful lawn of Georgetown. But thank you for being here, because it is absolutely critical what is going on here. At issue, I think, are really two basic values of this country. One is that the First Amendment protects free speech of all, not just of citizens, not even just of green card holders, but of all persons living in this country, whether you're here legally or illegally. We actually established that proposition in a case I litigated many, many years ago. It began in 1987, long before most of you were born, involving a group of Palestinian students who were arrested and thrown in detention and put into deportation proceedings in Los Angeles for their advocacy in support of Palestinian self-determination. The charge against them back then was that they were members of a group that advocates the doctrines of world communism. And why was that the charge? Because, well, the immigration law that was on the books was dated from the McCarthy era, and that was the boogeyman at that time. And so that was what they could charge these folks with, because they had not engaged in any criminal activity. They had, like Dr. Badar Khan Suri and Mahmoud Khalil, they had spoken out in support of Palestinian self-determination, but that's not a crime. That's not illegal. And so they charged them with being deportable for being members of a group that advocates world communism. The first thing we did was go to federal court and challenge the constitutionality of that law, a law that dated back to 1952. And the argument we made was the First Amendment protects speech. It says Congress shall not abridge the freedom of speech. It doesn't say the freedom of speech of citizens. It says freedom of speech. And the Supreme Court, in a case in the 1970s, said that because that's what the First Amendment says, it protects even the speech of corporations, which are not human beings, because we all have an interest in hearing from everybody. The First Amendment protects speech and our access to that speech, regardless of the source of the speech. And therefore, inanimate entities, corporations, have free speech rights. Well, we argued, by the same reasoning, certainly if corporations have speech rights, actual human beings living among us have speech rights. We have just as much of an interest in hearing from the millions of foreign nationals who live among us as we do from hearing from Nike or Meta. And we won. And the court struck down the McCarran-Walter Act as unconstitutional and said, yes, all people in the United States have First Amendment rights. And since you couldn't punish a citizen for being a member of a group that advocated world communism, you can't deport a foreign national for being a member of a group that advocates for world communism. And Congress then repealed that provision of the McCarran-Walter Act. The case went on because they then enacted a new law that made it a deportable offense to provide material support for terrorist organizations, and they charged our clients under that, and we defended them ultimately successfully from that deportation, but it took 21 years to do so. But what was at stake there was the freedom of speech of all people in this country. The freedom of foreign nationals to speak out, the freedom of citizens to hear from foreign nationals. And that freedom is critical, because if the many millions of people who live among us, who are our neighbors, who are our classmates, who are our roommates, are foreign nationals, and they can be deported for saying something that those of us who are citizens can't even be punished for, then we don't live in a society that respects free speech. We don't have free speech. So that's the first thing that's at stake, the scope of free speech rights for all. The second thing, and that case didn't go to the Supreme Court because Congress repealed the McCarran-Walter Act provision at stake. So we don't have a Supreme Court ruling on this question. We may, in one of these cases, get that. The other thing that is at stake here is academic freedom, because this is really a twofold attack. It's an attack on those who are advocating for Palestinian self-determination, those who are criticizing Israel. It's absolutely an attack on those folks, but it is also absolutely an attack on the academy, on universities, and especially on the more elite universities. And anti-Semitism and DEI, as Masha Geshen said in the paper today, is just the excuse. If you think back 5 years ago, what was the right wing criticizing universities for? For being too intolerant of free speech. And now what are they criticizing universities for? For being too tolerant of free speech. because it's alleged to be anti-Semitic speech. And they've gone after many universities and many more to come. And what does that have to do with the First Amendment? The Supreme Court has said universities are a special concern of the First Amendment. And academic freedom is a special concern of the First Amendment because what the First Amendment protects is the right to think freely, to speak freely, to associate freely, to criticize the government, to disagree with those in power. And where does that happen? I mean, in a healthy society, it happens everywhere. But one of the places that it happens is at universities. And that's why they're going after universities. They are seeking to neutralize a potential site of opposition. That's why they're also going after law firms. I don't know how many people have followed this closely, but Trump is attacking the big law firms. Totally illegal targeting of them in retaliation for their representing immigrants, representing transgender people, and hiring people that he doesn't like. But what's that about, really? It's about neutralizing the opposition. Because if you are, planning to undertake a whole bunch of illegal activity, lawyers can be a pest because lawyers sue you when you engage in illegal activity. So let's neutralize the opposition, going after universities, going after the law firms, going after the press, kicking AP out of the Oval Office because it calls the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico, going after the public sector unions because they are suing the president over his attempts to take away their jobs. These are the actions of autocrats. This is what autocrats do when they come to power. They seek to neutralize the sites of opposition. And ultimately, the extent to which Trump succeeds in this particular campaign and his many unlawful campaigns depends on the strength of these sites of opposition, the willingness of these sites of opposition to stand up in opposition and not cave and capitulate. That's what distinguishes constitutional democracies from autocracies. It is the strength of civil society. So I think it is absolutely critical that we be standing up and speaking out and organizing and protesting. And I totally understand that if you are a foreign national with a visa, you may not want to go out there and protest. I totally understand, given the way what they're doing. But that makes it all the more incumbent on those of us who are citizens to get out there and protest. Because if we sit back and let this happen, there's no telling where it ends. But if we stand up and stand together and come out to the protests and work with the organizations that are defending civil rights and civil liberties, we can defeat this man. We did it once before. We can do it again. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, David. The theme of authoritarianism here is really important because, as you said, what we're seeing right now is right out of the authoritarian playbook. Everything that we're seeing Trump do has been done by other autocrats in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia. And this is not just a passing moment. It's part of a broader strategy. So I'm hoping we can return to that during the question and answer session. Sarah Leowitson, thank you for joining us. I'm assuming you're in New York right now. The floor is yours. And I think you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, and I apologize for my oversized head. It's looking a little creepy behind all of you guys, but there you have it. I thank you for the folks and your remarks, and I think you guys are really the experts on the immigration aspects of this, on the free speech and First Amendment aspects of this. I'm not. So what I'd like to do is to really contextualize these arrests, these deportations, as part of a global censorship campaign, because I think that is one unprecedented and unique aspect of what we're seeing today, something that differs from censorship campaigns we've seen in the United States before, in other countries around the world before. And these censorship campaigns tend to be national censorship campaigns. They tend to be around issues that are specific to a particular country and the politics of a specific country. But what we're seeing today is a global censorship campaign that is targeting people advocating on one very specific issue, which is human rights abuses by Israel, albeit aided and abetted by the United States. And it is largely and overwhelmingly driven by people who are concerned with Israel and not the United States. So this is a censorship campaign that stretches well beyond the United States and Israel, where, by the way, the Israeli government is passing laws that will criminalize certain speech activities of even Israeli Jewish citizens, but now extends to much of Europe, where we are seeing very similar conduct and actions in terms of quashing protests, deporting immigrants based on their criticism of Israel, other aspects of censorship. And of course, these targets of this global censorship campaign include universities, journalists, scholars, activists, nonprofit organizations, students, lawyers, courts like the International Criminal Court, like the International Court of Justice, governments like the government of South Africa that is facing all kinds of retaliation for bringing a case charging Israel with genocide. Even doctors, engineers, and others who are remotely involved. You know, it's not their day job like it's my day job to advocate, but have been moved by the genocide in Gaza to become involved. And all of those people are in the crosshairs of this global censorship campaign that is driven by Israel and supporters of Israel. And the reason we're seeing it is because they have lost the war of ideas. They've lost the power of persuasion. The vast majority of the world, the majority of Americans are no longer buying the Hasbara that Israel and its supporters are selling. That somehow they can justify the genocide in Gaza by talking about the Holocaust, by talking about anti-Semitism, by talking about terrorism, whatever it is. It's not working, and that's why we've seen a global expression of support in favor of Palestinians, global, worldwide protests in favor and in support of Palestinians, coupled with calls for divestment, movements for divestment, expansion of the BDS movement. And since this a war of ideas is being lost in the contest and the battle for ideas, it's now turned to an actual effort to repress that speech, repress the ideas of Palestinian liberation, of an end to genocide, of an end to occupation, of an end to apartheid by force, since they can't win by persuasion. And we should understand that the modern flavors and versions and definitions of anti-Semitism and so-called support for terrorism are the primary cudgels that are now being used to sanction and punish and operate this global repression campaign. This is a campaign that is developed not only by agencies of the US government, but organizations and individuals here in the United States who have for a long time sought to find ways to use an allegation or a charge of anti-Semitism as a basis for sanctions, to define supporting Palestinian rights and freedom as support for terrorism, and to cause sanctions and penalties to stem from that contact. I think it's also important to note that one of the first executive orders Trump issued on January 20, followed by a second one on January 27, specifically talked about deporting people, sanctioning students and universities for speech critical of Israel, also now labeled anti-Semitism. And I want to refresh everyone's recollection about why so many of us have been fighting tooth and nail against the so-called IRA, or International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism, which we have long said is the Trojan horse that will be used to silence and censor and sanction speech that is supportive of Palestinian rights, speech that accurately describes Israeli governance as apartheid governance, as racist governance, and speech that describes this apartheid governance, this racist governance, as one that goes back to the very founding of Israel in 1948. Many of us said, "Oh, well, these things that you're talking about, they're just examples in the appendix to the definition. They're not really what the actual definition of IRA, which has now been adopted by so many states, by so many U.S. government agencies, by so many U.S. universities, is about." But to the surprise of very few of us, I would say none of us who've been fighting this, it is, in fact, these very examples in the so-called appendix to the definition, the examples of anti-Semitism in the IRA definition, that are the leading way in which the IRA definition is being employed and deployed as a cudgel to silence speech that describes Israel as an apartheid state, as an illegal racist occupation. We've just heard about the shocking, ever expanding visa revocations for reasons such as harming U.S. foreign policy, or no reason at all. We've discovered that Ozturk at Tufts, really the government hasn't even bothered to offer a reason why they're deporting her. And we've all been, I think, very quickly educated overnight about the fact that immigration judges are not federal judges in constitutional courts and are not bound by the same due process, habeas corpus, and constitutional protections as federal courts. And we're now, testing notions of First Amendment rights of visitors in the United States, while they may have some First Amendment freedoms and have First Amendment freedoms, if their visa status can be revoked at any time on First Amendment grounds, do they in fact have First Amendment freedoms? But now this is escalating beyond. So we are now seeing American citizens being subject to search and seizure at the border for their pro-Palestine advocacy, or even merely for their pro-Palestine representation, like the case of the lawyer in Michigan who was asked to turn over his phone and laptop and contacts because of his role representing students who had been penalized by the University of Michigan for their participation in protests. And very importantly, I think we are now seeing another novel development, which is downgrading the green card, downgrading the permanent residency status. And next that will follow is a Trump administration's effort to target naturalized citizens, to strip them of their citizenship under the same arcane and limited laws that were supposed to limit revocation of visas, and now are being used to revoke green cards and permanent residency, and soon with efforts to strip naturalized citizens of their citizenship. As I think most people here in the audience will understand, this is not even necessarily about whether or not they'll be successful. It is about the mere process of dragging people through, as we've just heard, 20 years of litigation, decades of litigation, to upend their lives, to impose a very steep cost on those who continue to advocate for their beliefs, advocate for their principles, advocate for human rights. I want to emphasize that this is not a Trump administration problem. This is the Trump administration taking to extremes what the Biden administration had already started with respect to sanctioning and casting aspersion on pro-Palestine speech, allowing attacks against student protesters, allowing city police to invade university campuses. And in fairness, it's not the first time we've seen massive visa revocations, though I believe before it has almost exclusively been limited to national grounds. So even under the Carter administration, visa holders from Iran found their visas revoked. In the first Trump administration, we had visas for Chinese citizens revoked, and of course, the Muslim bans. Now the Trump administration is talking about pursuing a new China visa ban, they've announced a visa ban on all South Sudanese, which includes revoking the visas of people from those countries who are in our country. Now, I think these are really efforts to soften up the playing field for the speech-based visa revocations. But we're also seeing an attack on association, and our right to associate as people in the United States, and our right to associate anonymously. So I want to make sure that folks are also thinking about the Trump administration's efforts to seek the student disciplinary records from universities, which is, very dangerous, because it's all of the information they may get, not just about students, the student who is subject to the disciplinary proceeding, but the names of the groups they belong to, other members of the groups, the member roles, their majors, their financial aid, their mental health records, the names of their family members. So this is, also an effort to violate our association rights and to make us afraid of associating with those individuals and organizations who are advocating for Palestinian rights and freedoms. I think we have I think Nader already mentioned that this is also part of a broader attack on higher education and liberal arts in general. And of course, when you think this through, it has to do with places where people gather and meet, where they're exposed to new ideas, perspectives, and freedoms, where they imagine how the world can be different. And that is what is a threat to people like those in the Trump administration, and to people who don't want us to be talking about Palestinian freedom and liberation, don't want us to talk about Israeli abuses and Israeli genocide. And the fact that universities like Columbia in particular, Harvard University as well, and I'm sure we'll see others, have voluntarily complied with these letter demands from the Trump administration, despite their own First Amendment rights. They could be fighting these, but they've chosen not to. They could even fight a subpoena, but they've chosen not to. And I think that will be to their lasting discredit and to the lasting harm of all of the universities who will now find cover in Columbia's capitulation and Harvard's capitulation. And I think Harvard's trying to walk it back a little bit now with a little partial or undoing of its capitulation. But ultimately, all of these measures have one principal goal, and that is fear. And as much as I'd like everyone in the United States to be fearless, we know that fear is working. We know that students and faculty are scared to leave their apartments, just like the Columbia student who was detained today, who was actually staying in his apartment for, I believe, 3 weeks, trying not to leave because afraid of what might happen to him. We know that immigrant visa holders, green card holders, are afraid to leave the country. I just this week happened to talk to a random American citizen whose parents are from India, who was telling me that they were not taking a vacation to I don't know where, the Bahamas or somewhere, because there's so much uncertainty, and they were so afraid that their own visas might be revoked or something might happen. My own relatives, some of whom are green card holders, are afraid to travel to the Middle East this summer for a family wedding because who knows? It's that uncertainty, it's that fear that is driving even U.S. citizens to fear interrogation on reentry. While of course we know that we don't have First Amendment rights and limited rights against unreasonable search and seizure when we're outside the United States. We also have a right to return to our country. But still, the overwhelming pressure and fear that people have is either to leave their phones and laptops behind, to scrub their laptops and phones, which is what we're advising others to do when they leave the United States, even if they're U.S. citizens. But ultimately, it is going to be up to each of us, as I think David just alluded to resist succumbing to fear, to fight back and to push back, particularly those of us who are citizens and have the privilege as citizens to greater protections. Because
Thank you, Sarah. We're going to have to transition to the Q&A.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the last thought.
I was just ending there too. So I'll stop.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for ending on that note about the importance of resistance. We've pitched this event as an open forum, so I want to leave as much time as possible. We have about 35 minutes for questions and answers, so the rules are the standard ones. No long speeches. Please line up behind the microphone. Keep your statements and or speeches maximum to a minute. I don't want to act as an authoritarian since we're talking about authoritarianism, but sometimes you have to do so to keep everything on track, at least in limited capacity.
And anybody that wants to ask a question, please feel free to walk along the sides and come to the mic to ask the question.
Yeah. Okay, first question, Danish.
Good afternoon. I'm Danish Faruqi. I teach here at the Al-Walid Center. Thank you so much for this very illuminating discussion. I think that given the pressures and the constant losses that we're now seeing, it'd be ratcheting up with each passing day, it would really be helpful to hear a bit more, and Professor Cole, you briefly alluded to this, to wins that we have experienced in dealing with these similar phenomenon. So if you could speak a bit more about that.
And I'll also ask our distinguished panel to keep their answers as short as possible so we can get to as many questions as possible. Go ahead, David.
So, as I said, the LA8, the group that I represented, were not deported. They're all here. They're now all U.S. citizens. So that was a win. And I represented a whole number of Arab Muslim men who the government sought to detain or deport using secret evidence in the 90s. And in every instance, we went to court, challenged what the government was doing on due process and First Amendment grounds, and won. So I don't think it's a done deal that, Dr. Khan Suri or Mahmoud Khalil are going to lose. The one decision on the merits in the federal courts on whether this provision that makes it a deportable offense if your presence poses a threat to foreign policy declared that provision unconstitutional. It was written by President Trump's sister, Marion Trump Berry, a district court judge, and that decision never went any further because, as we heard, the individual killed himself, so the case went away. But there's only one decision, and it's a pretty basic proposition. If I have the right to post the social media post that Dr. Khan Suri posted without the government having any opportunity to or any right to punish me, then how can it deport him for doing something that I have the constitutional right to do, if indeed the First Amendment protects all of us equally, which again the courts have generally said does. So I think the courts the last time around The last time around, President Trump had the worst one-loss record in the Supreme Court of any president since the early term of FDR, when the Supreme Court was striking down all kinds of New Deal legislation and the like. But you know, and he had the worst one-loss record in the lower courts. Judges across this country have ruled against many of the initiatives. I think there's now at least 50 court orders enjoining various aspects of what President Trump has done, including courts of appeals, including judges appointed by President Trump. So this game is not over at all, and we can definitely win if we fight back. But it's absolutely critical that we fight back. We can't rely on courts to do it alone. If they see there's substantial concern in the community, it's easier for them to do the right thing. If they see the community folding, then it's much harder for them to do the right thing. So I think it's important that we, you know, call out and celebrate those who are fighting back, like Dr. Khan Suri, and that we, you know, criticize those who capitulate, but not prematurely. I don't think Harvard has capitulated. Harvard has $9 billion of funds under review, but it has not, no action has been taken against Harvard. It has not decided whether it's going to fight or not, and that would be a huge question. And I also think we should not, you know, I'm going to disagree with Sarah on this. We should not suggest that what Trump is doing is what Biden was doing. It is not. What Trump is doing is what no president has done in peacetime ever before. And so to suggest that Trump is sort of, you know, akin to Biden with respect to protests, I mean, Biden didn't seek to deport anybody for protesting what was going on in Israel and Gaza. Trump is systematically doing so. So I think it's important that we celebrate those who are fighting back, that we be careful about our criticism, and that we acknowledge just how extraordinary the Trump moment is and how important it is for us to speak up in them.
Okay. We want to get to as many questions as possible. We have a long lineup here. If you can keep them as short as possible, we can get to more people. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. I was curious if the news about the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and the deportations involving the El Salvador prisons and the Alien Enemies Act have any bearing over Dr. Khan Suri and any cases that are adjacent to it.
Shh, don't give him any ideas. Not at this point. Like I said, the only charge for against Dr. Khan Suri at this point is the foreign policy ground, you know, just because a lot of these laws are getting, you know, dusted off and used in new and novel and nefarious ways, does not mean that it's going to stand the test of constitutionality. So let them try.
Okay, next question, sir. Go ahead.
I'm not going to say anything about Columbia, except that all of my Georgetown students who've gone off to Columbia are both disgusted and not surprised. But I've heard Harvard described as capitulating. I wonder if that takes into account the letter that President Garber sent out at 1:29 this afternoon, which indicated that they might be resisting the agreement that supposedly the government wants them to sign on to.
Do you have details on what Harvard is doing right now? I know with respect to Middle East Studies, which I cover closely, they fired the senior sort of staff of the Center for Middle East Studies, got rid of them summarily, and that sounded like full capitulation to me. So do you know, anyone know more about what's happening at Harvard?
Sent out a copy of the letter to our group this afternoon.
Yeah, I just think look, each university has to approach this on its own, you know, footing and faces different challenges. Right now, the Trump administration has not frozen any funds as to Harvard. It's reviewing $9 billion in federal funding, which shows how much, you know, how dependent Harvard is on federal funding, but just reviewing, not actually taking any action. Once it takes action, as it did with Columbia, freezing funds, then you have to make the decision. Do you settle, as Columbia did, or do you fight? And you know, my understanding is that that is very much an open question at Harvard, and you know that it hasn't yet met the moment because it hasn't happened. But if I haven't seen this letter, that may be an indication. They also took out a major loan, which also may be an indication that they're planning to fight. I certainly hope they fight. It would be huge if they do. So I just think we shouldn't, pre-condemn them.
Sorry, if I could
Go
just
ahead. Go ahead, Sarah.
I noted that it was a partial capitulation, and I do think it's important to recognize that firing the heads of the Middle East Studies Center, the two faculty leaders, firing a professor at the Harvard Divinity School, as well as cutting ties with Al-Haq University in the West Bank. These were all actions that Harvard University took to deal with the threat from President Trump. Fortunately, and I say this as a Harvard alum, there's been enough pushback from the faculty, from the students, from alumni, that I hope is part of the reason why we've seen the letter that Garber issued today, and I very much hope they'll look to it. But these actions that they took are definitely ones that I perceive as capitulation. And to clarify, I don't think that what Trump is doing is the same as what Biden administration has done, and I don't think I suggested that at all. What I do think we have to recognize is that the Biden administration paved the way for some of the things that were happening today, particularly in terms of a failure to protect student protesters, a failure to vocally, publicly support student protesters, as opposed to what we saw during the tail end of the Biden administration. So these things are on a spectrum, and we can obviously see Trump as an extreme end of it. I hope he's the extreme end of it, but they are sadly on a spectrum.
Thanks, Sarah. We're going to go to the next question in the room, and then I have one online question that will go next. Go ahead.
Great. Good evening. My name is Angelina Mosier Salazar, and I'm a first-year MBA student here at the McDonough School of Business. A question for Attorney Ahmed. You mentioned a little bit about the Fifth Circuit and its role in the techniques of ICE. Could you talk a little bit about that? And for Professor Cole, coming from the business school, it just seems like we are apolitical. We do not want to get involved, but yet you have put something out, which is like, if we are a citizen of this country, we have a responsibility to be out, to attend the protest, especially given our counterparts who might be on a student visa. Could you explain a little bit more the importance of that? Because it can feel like, hey, I just want to stay out of this. I don't want to be involved. What is the importance of actually getting involved, and why do our bodies make a difference? Thank you.
Hassan?
Well, very briefly, the Fifth Circuit case law, well, it's horrible. It's just there's no other way to describe it. It's everything from asking for review of credible fear determinations, credible fear interviews for people that are coming in across the border, the initial step in being able to apply for asylum. Cases that I know in the Third or Fourth or Ninth or other circuits would definitely have gotten reversed. In the Fifth Circuit, they're just not. The definition of what is considered a particular social group, the definitions of particularity and social distinction and visibility, and all of these sort of technical requirements, all are understood, all are interpreted by many Fifth Circuit judges in a way that denies the immigration benefit being sought. So it's an uphill battle in the Fifth Circuit.
David, before you answer the question that was posed to you, I just want to read the online question because it overlaps with what was just asked. The online questioner asked, it shocks me to see how apathetic the majority of people are still with respect to losing our First Amendment rights, because many people see this as just a Palestine issue. How do we get fellow Americans to recognize that this will bite all of us if it's not seriously addressed right now?
So just one word on the Fifth Circuit. It is also the most reversed circuit in the country. So even though the Supreme Court is quite conservative, 6 Republican appointees, very conservative, 3 Democratic appointees, pretty liberal, the court that it reverses the most is the Fifth Circuit. And this case, this issue about the Secretary of State's ability to just identify anybody and say, hey, your activities threaten our foreign policy, and therefore we're going to deport you. I think that case will go to the Supreme Court. So it's not, at the end of the day, it's not just the Fifth Circuit. It's certainly not just Palestine, right? I mean, all you have to do is read the newspaper every day, and you see this is not just about Palestine. This is about targeting those. It's about targeting the vulnerable, which include Palestinians, include transgender folks, include non-citizens, include people of color. So, that's certainly, targeting the most vulnerable, but it is also about trying to neutralize sites of opposition, checks and balances. And that is relevant to every last one of us. Our freedoms as Americans depends on a system of checks and balances, which includes an independent court, which includes separation of powers, but also includes a First Amendment that gives you the right to speak out, the right to assemble, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, the right to the free press to report on presidential abuses, the right to associate with people with whom you agree. Those are their First Amendment freedoms, but they're also checks on government abuse. And they're incredibly important checks on government abuse, but they're not self-executing, right? They only work if we engage them, if we invoke them, if we act. So, I mean, last weekend, Hands Off, was an across-the-board opposition to what Trump is doing, to what Trump is doing to unions, to what Trump is doing to government employees, what Trump is doing to foreign aid, to what Trump is doing to colleges, to what Trump is doing to Palestinian advocates, to what Trump is doing to lawyers, right? To what Trump is doing to transgender folks. I mean, if anything, if Trump can't unite us in standing up, nothing can. But I will say, I was at the protests, and I was at protests in a Chicago suburb, because that's where I was with my father. My daughter was at a protest in Chicago, and we both, and then a number of people were here at a protest, and we all had a similar observation, which is there were a lot of old people there, like me. There were some sort of, youngish parents there, but students were not there. Students need to get out. Students need to start protesting. This is about your country and the freedom of your country. And do protests matter? Absolutely they matter. They change the conversation. They change the way the country sees these issues. And if the country sort of sees, and there's a kind of snowball effect. If you sit back and say, oh, I'm not going to go to the protest today, the weather's cold, or, I haven't been attacked yet, I don't want to put my head up. Well, then, then that makes the protest less effective. And then those who go to the protest will say, oh, well, that protest wasn't that effective. And that snowballs in this direction. If you get out there and you engage, right, then that makes whatever that action more effective, and that inspires others. That's why Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy and heads up the Equal Justice Initiative, he says the enemy of justice is not injustice, it's hopelessness. We cannot be hopeless. We have to get out there, engage, stand up, and if we do, we'll win. It's happened before, and that's why we have a First Amendment, to protect our right to do exactly that.
Thank you. Next question.
We've seen how the Trump administration is willing to break laws and disregard the courts. So I wanted to ask, how far do you think legal processes can go in resisting the Trump administration, and what would you consider the best ways to supplement that form of resistance?
That sounds like something for you, David.
Well, again, I do think the courts will have more backbone if they see the country is upset with what's going on. I also think we should be careful about this whole notion of defying the courts. It may be that the Trump administration will defy the courts. They have not yet said that they have the power to defy the courts. When Trump was asked the question, he said, "I abide by court orders. I appeal, abide by court orders." Last time around, as I said, he lost more cases than any president since FDR. He followed all those decisions, even though he didn't like them. No president in the history of this country has defied a Supreme Court order. It would be a massive, massive red line were he to do so. And so I actually don't think he will. And people talk about defying courts in a very broad-based way, but what you have right now in the courts is courts ruling against the president taking action, the plaintiff saying the president didn't do enough, the president's lawyers coming in saying, well, we did enough, or here's what we did, or this order didn't actually affect this part, and in some instances, courts saying, yeah, that's right, and other courts saying, no, that's wrong. But that happens all the time, right? I mean, all the time, defendants who lose cases and have injunctions against them then have to, then have to follow those orders, and the plaintiffs argue that they have not followed those orders, and there's hearings on whether they're following those orders. That's why school desegregation cases went on for decades. Prison litigation goes on for decades. So, but that is very different, right? You can be sort of not acting in good faith, trying to avoid compliance with the court order, and that seems to be what's going on with Mr. Garcia, to be sure. But it is very different to say, the court has ruled, and I don't have to follow the court because I'm the president. That is a red line. That is the mark between a constitutional democracy in which the Constitution actually governs and an autocracy in which the president is all powerful. And so that is the red line that we all have to be aware of. But let's not call it, suggest that he've already gone over the red line, because then when he does go over the red line, if he does, people will say, oh, boy, who cried wolf? You've been saying he's been defying court orders for years. So what's the big deal? It is a big deal, but it hasn't happened yet.
Do you want to add something?
He kind of said it. The only thing I would add is let's not get anywhere near that red line. Let's stop him well before that.
Okay. Next question.
So I'm an undergraduate freshman here, and on April 11th, I got an email from the Dean of the School of Foreign Service telling us that Georgetown joined an amicus brief in the case of AAUP versus Rubio that challenges the administration's revocation of visas and detentions of non-citizen students and scholars. If you are aware about that, can you give me your opinion and what you think about it? Because I'm not a legal expert, and I honestly was confused about what this meant. And secondly, a lot of international governments, including the Indian government, have said in the case of Dr. Suri and other deportations that international students should follow the local laws and regulations of the country they're in. They shouldn't criticize that government. They should just, keep quiet and be mum about anything that's going on politically. What do you have to say in response to these governments? And what is your opinion on that?
You want to go?
I can, initially at least. I am somewhat familiar. I did skim through that lawsuit, the AAUP lawsuit that is seeking. It is a much larger fight, and I'm glad that they filed it. I believe it was filed on March 25th, and so I'm not sure exactly where it is as of today. But the idea here is to stop the administration from being able to use this foreign policy ground in the way, weaponize it in the way that they have been. Which would, if it's successful, then it would be a way to actually stop all of these, persecutions, and I'll use that word instead of prosecutions. So I think that it's a great idea. It remains to be seen what's actually going to happen. With regard to Indian officials saying, and I did see that interview where where some minister said that students should follow the law of the land. I would argue that's exactly what Badar Khan Suri was doing. Mm-hmm. So he was exercising his right to free speech. That's the law of the land. And if they don't think it is, we have a serious problem.
I would just say I would just say kudos to Georgetown for filing an amicus brief in that AAUP case, which is an effort, an across-the-board effort to declare this use of the provision unconstitutional.
Yeah, I want to second that because a lot of universities chose not to sign on to that petition. So kudos to Georgetown for doing so. Archard.
I have a question for Dr. Cole. Over the past 18 months, I've been to various protests and I've seen similar faces largely. So when you point out that we need to be careful in our criticism, do you think that deters students from being more brave and joining the protests? Because if the ongoing genocide does not unite people, why does Trump has to have that kind of effect on American people?
So what I said was I understand why foreign nationals might feel, I think it's working, why foreign nationals might feel chilled. You know, I think I would feel chilled if I was a foreign national now. If you are a foreign national and you're out there protesting, more power to you. But plea is to those of us who are citizens as to whom the government has no authority to go after us, for us to make sure that we're using our First Amendment rights. That's all.
Okay, Okay, we have one last question, then we're going to go to the panel for final comments and then wrap it up. Go ahead.
Thank you. You spoke about the importance of student advocacy, and I just wanted to speak to the fact that on this past Friday morning, about a dozen Georgetown students staged a peaceful sit-in in Healy Hall to demand that Georgetown protect free speech, protect pro-Palestine speech, and publicly defend Dr. Suri because they have not sent out a university-wide email condemning his abduction. And less than 2 hours after the sit-in started, the administration ordered GUPD to violently drag students out of the building and remove them from campus, and then proceeded to call MPD on its own students. So I was just wondering if you could talk about institutional measures that Georgetown could take to fight this global censorship campaign that you're talking about, rather than align with fascistic state repression and endanger its own students. Thank you.
Well, since David is a Georgetown faculty member, let's get him to answer the question.
Look, you know, I think Georgetown has actually been doing a good job, basically. I mean, again, I think the signing of this amicus brief was an act of courage. It's been a leader in the, and our former president, Jack DeGioia, was a leader in promoting free speech on campus. I headed up a working group last year to work on ways to promote free speech and dialogue on campus across difference. So I wouldn't be so quick to criticize Georgetown. You know, when you sit in a building, you know, or you engage in an encampment, you know, most of the time you don't have a right to do that. And I think I have always understood people who do that engaging in civil disobedience, which is, I recognize that I don't have a right to do this, but I care sufficiently about the cause that I will, you know, block access to a building, or I will disrupt X, Y, or Z, et cetera. And I will take the consequences for doing so, because I believe, I'm not claiming the right to violate laws because I believe in the cause that I'm speaking. I claim that I believe the causes are so important that I'm willing to violate the law and take the consequences. That's what Mahatma Gandhi did. That's what Martin Luther King did. So I think if you occupy a building, or if you do a sit-in, you know, you should expect that you're not going to be able to do that, you know, for a very long time, and that the school can take measures against you. But if you know, your commitment is to those values, you're willing to take that on. You know, I mean, my kids engaged in that kind of civil disobedience at their school to protest, you know, fossil fuel investment in fossil fuels, and they were arrested. And they were proud that they got arrested. And I didn't blame the school for arresting them, because they were violating the law in what they were, you know, in their occupation. So I think, you know, I would not be so quick to criticize Georgetown for enforcing neutral rules that apply to everybody equally.
Great, thank you. Let's wrap this up by getting a final word from all of you on what concretely and substantively everyone can do tomorrow when they wake up to try and shift and fight back against this authoritarian juggernaut that's coming to consume all of us. I mean, you said, David, for example, people have to protest, you have to go out on the street. I mean, that's sort of axiomatic and self-evident, but I'm wondering if everyone on the panel can think of something more concrete, both in the short term and the long term, that they can be doing and should be doing to support these, you know, imprisoned detainees like Badar Khan Suri, but more broadly to push back against, you know, the transition to authoritarianism. What are the short-term priorities? What are the longer-term things we need to be doing? We want people to leave here with sort of some hope and some ideas on how they can actively sort of fight back against where we are as a country. And if we don't obviously fight back, we're going to be in a lot worse place in the coming years. So I'm going to start with Sarah in New York, since she's joining us long distance. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if protesting on the streets is not your thing, find another way to contribute. Be involved, be engaged. I do think that what we're seeing now, what's happening, is not just a product of people with evil agendas, but a complacent citizenry that has taken their democratic rights and freedoms for granted, that has assumed that their entitlements that are, you know, automatic. And I hope this has all reminded us that we have to actively participate as citizens, as people living in this country, to uphold and protect our rights and freedoms, the checks on our government, the checks on the executive branch. You can volunteer for countless organizations that need your help. Even if you're not an immigration lawyer with decades of expertise, you can volunteer to be the delivery person who carries stuff around for them or brings them coffee. So the most important thing I would say for everyone is to accept that being informed and engaged is not just a nice thing to do. It really is your obligation and duty if you want to live in a free democracy.
Thank you, Sarah. Hassan?
So I was actually thinking a lot about this, and when we opened this conversation, it was they're calling Dr. Badar Khan Suri Gandhi in a detention facility where he is, and that's actually deeply personal to me. My grandfather was a speaker for the Indian National Congress Party during the time of partition, and he was elected for the provincial chairmanship of the Jamiat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, the Council of Religious Scholars of India, and stood firmly for his Gandhian vision of Hindu-Muslim unity. But of course, forces ripped apart the subcontinent in 1947, and he escaped with the rest of his family to an ancestral home in Punjab on the Pakistani side of the border. And on his first night in this new country, he stood up and said that the minority Hindus and Sikhs, the Hindus and Sikhs who had been the majority were now the minority, and it was the responsibility of the new Muslim majority in Pakistan to protect them. He had turned down offers of provincial chairmanship and offers of politics and position in India, and left and returned to his traditional practice of medicine, hikmat, before he died in 1957. I never met him, actually, but one thing I know about him is that he was a fiery speaker in Urdu and Farsi and Arabic and Punjabi. He spoke no English, but he knew the word agitate. And that was one of his favorite words, and was jailed several times by the British Raj. And I often think about what, if he were alive, if he were seeing what was happening in today's America, what advice he would have. And I'd like to think that he would advise us to find ways to work together and build solidarity with those who have common goals. Even if you don't agree on everything, you don't have to agree on everything. You find the common ground and you build your coalitions and you work together. I think he would have counseled to never stop seeking or speaking truth to power, even if it's going to get you killed, and likewise, sometimes it will. I think that he would counsel us to to have faith in our institutions and trust and work to empower them. He used to drive around on a bicycle with a yellow vote box. I mean, it doesn't work that way here, but he had a yellow vote box, and he rode around on his bicycle around the streets of Sagar, India, to make sure that everybody who could vote voted. And so he would actually ride around on his bicycle, and there was a little yellow box that said "Pili pete mein vote dalo." You put your vote in the yellow box, and he would actually get people to vote that way. Let's make sure that our elected officials understand that there is a cost to supporting genocide, that there is a cost to supporting the detention of students like Dr. Badar Khan Suri and scholars like Dr. Badar Khan Suri and the people that have been arrested with him, and there is a cost to not supporting free speech. They need to understand that, and that means we need to make as many eligible voters as possible and make sure that our voices are heard in unison. And lastly, I think he would echo Gandhi's own vision and say that full effort is full victory.
Thank you, Hassan. Last comment to you, David.
Well, I can't top that. I would say amen. I think concretely, it's not just protesting. It's working with identifying groups that are pushing back, fighting back, and supporting them in whatever way you can, urging others to support them, urging your student associations to focus on this issue. Obviously, we're coming up on the exams in the summer, but this issue is not going away, and so let's come back in the fall and really, focus together on standing up for freedom against an administration that is very much seeking to tamp it down. Members of Congress actually pay attention to people who call them and write them. So make them understood. Go to town halls if you're home in the summer, and there's a town hall. Make your voices heard. And so I agree with all of that. Now I'll just close with a quote. One of my favorite quotes is a quote from Roberto Unger and Cornel West. From many years ago. It was called "The Future of American Progressivism." It was a very thin book, but it had a great quote in it. It said, and it's concise and thin, but no, it was but it had this idea, and it's about hope. They say, hope is more the consequence of action than its cause. As the perspective of the spectator favors fatalism, so the action of the agent produces hope. And so, what they are saying there is, you're not like born hopeful or pessimistic. You don't act because you have hope. You build hope by acting. And so, you have a choice here. You can be a spectator and favor fatalism, or you can be an agent and produce hope. I know what choice I would make.
Thank you very much on that note. Please join me in thanking the panel. And just in closing, we're going to be planning many more open forums like this until we're out of this crisis, so please stay tuned. Our Gaza lecture series is still ongoing. We have several more events planned. I hope to see you at all of them. Thank you for your participation. Hope to see you around. Thank you.